Since I can remember, my family has been in love with the sea. Its calmness, courage, and wildness have always fascinated us. The sea can be as predictable as it is unpredictable, and that's where our story begins, with my great-grandfather. His parents were fishermen, like most families in the area, but he was the first in the family to go to college and study marine biology. His joy and motivation were contagious, affecting everyone in the family, including me. My room was filled with posters of marine animals, sea monsters, and conspiracy stories. I lived for those tales and could spend hours watching YouTube videos about them. Alongside my passion for the sea, I had an immense love for travel. So when I finally started working and earning my own salary, I set aside money each month for a cruise. I spent months evaluating routes and companies, and when I had saved enough, I booked a journey from San Francisco to Melbourne. The cruise took 23 days to reach its destination, with a stop halfway in Honolulu, Hawaii. I had originally planned to go with a childhood friend who also loved the sea, but he couldn't get time off work. I decided not to let that stop me, and went ahead with the plan alone. I had traveled solo a few times before, and those trips had always been incredible. The first nights on the cruise were fantastic. There was music, good food, and a plethora of activities, from casinos to a water park that could make many others envious. However, I wasn't used to the constant rocking of the ship, no matter how slight. Whenever I had insomnia, I'd step outside for some fresh air, enjoy the view, and watch the sea. When we finally reached Honolulu and the ship stopped for 2 nights, I felt the rocking subside. It was still there, but only someone extremely sensitive like me would notice. Yet, my sleep cycle was already disrupted, and I could only fall asleep around 3 a.m. Each night, I went to the same spot on the ship, but that night, I wanted a better view of the land, so I moved to the opposite side. Everything seemed calm, as if it were part of a dream, until I saw some lights on the dark beach. They were faint and flickering, as if those using them wanted to remain anonymous. Then I heard voices coming from directly below, almost whispers. I looked down and saw a small boat with crew members and numerous backpacks. Were they taking the opportunity to switch the ship's staff? Or were they just taking a break and enjoying the night in Honolulu? But if that were the case, why not use the main exit instead of that tiny boat? As they approached the shore, the lights on the beach flickered irregularly, drawing closer to the water. Then it hit me. At that moment, I didn't know what was in those backpacks, but I knew that something illegal was likely going on, given the secrecy. That's when I realized someone from the boat had looked up, and directly at me. Instinctively, I hid, but it was too late. They had seen me. My only consolation was knowing that just as I couldn't distinguish their features due to the dark and the distance, they likely couldn't distinguish mine. There were thousands of people on board, and I didn't have a particularly memorable face. I quickly turned around, still hidden by the ship's edge, and walked back to my room. Despite the relief of my anonymity, I spent the night restless, with countless theories running through my mind. The next day, I got up, took a shower, and went back to the same spot on the ship. I didn't know why I felt compelled to return, but my body had taken control. That's when I saw it, right where I had stood the night before. There was a camera mounted on the wall. I hadn't noticed it before, and my blood ran cold. The person who had seen me worked on the ship. That much I was certain because they were still in uniform. This meant they could potentially access the security footage. Should I have reported it to the police immediately? Yes, I should have. I still regret not doing so. For the next 4 days, I was a bundle of nerves. By now, we were back at sea, heading toward Melbourne, with no escape except overboard. At night, I dreamed of being found and thrown overboard. During the day, I constantly looked over my shoulder, but nothing happened. And as days passed, I began to relax. Maybe I had imagined the person looking at me in the adrenaline of the moment. So finally, I slept peacefully that night. I took a hot, relaxing shower, went to bed early, and don't remember falling asleep. I was clearly exhausted from the stress of the past days. Little did I know that the real horror was just beginning the next morning. When I woke up, I immediately noticed something beside me. I jumped up and read the small note left on the pillow beside me. "I know it was you who saw us. If you talk, you'll find out what the bottom of the sea looks like." I was petrified. Someone had been in my room while I slept, mere inches from me, and worse, they knew who I was and had total access to me for the next 14 days of the journey. I spent the day in my room, thinking about every possible option. I couldn't talk to anyone on the ship about it. I didn't know how many people were involved. Talking to other passengers wouldn't help either. Paranoia took hold of me. I decided the best course of action was to act as normally as possible. If they knew I'd seen something, they also knew I hadn't reported it, yet. This meant they were still watching me, waiting to see what I'd do. The following days were a blur of fear and anxiety. I kept to myself, avoiding any contact with the crew beyond the essential. Every night I checked my room for any signs of tampering, though it was futile. Whoever had been in my room had done so without leaving a trace. The crew's activities that had once excited me now seemed like a distant memory. I couldn't enjoy any of it, knowing the threat that loomed over me. As we approached the halfway point to Melbourne, the tension was unbearable. Then, something unexpected happened. One evening, as I was pacing the deck, a crew member approached me. My heart raced, but his demeanor was friendly, almost too friendly. "Hi, John. Enjoying the cruise?" he asked. I nodded, forcing a smile, but his eyes told a different story. They were searching, assessing. He lingered a moment longer than necessary, then moved on. That brief interaction confirmed my fears. They were keeping tabs on me. Desperation set in. I needed a plan. The next port of call, a brief stop in Samoa, was my chance. I decided to disembark and report everything to the authorities there. The risk of being followed was high, but staying on the ship felt like a death sentence. The night before we reached Samoa, I packed a small bag with essentials and kept it hidden. I barely slept, my mind racing with escape scenarios. As dawn broke, I was ready. When the ship docked, I blended in with the crowd of disembarking passengers. My heart pounded as I stepped onto the pier, half expecting a hand to grab me and pull me back. But nothing happened. I walked briskly toward the nearest police station, every step a battle against the urge to look over my shoulder. When I finally reached it, I explained everything to the officers. They took my story seriously, especially when I showed them the note. The local authorities assured me they would investigate and offered me protection while they coordinated with international agencies. I never went back to the ship. In the next few days, as I was collaborating with the police, they arranged a flight for me to go back home. Once there, I reported the incident to the American police, but the cruise line's team quickly managed to turn the situation around, claiming there was no evidence of what I had seen. A week after I got home, the threats started. They were never anything I could use as proof in court. Just small things that made me uneasy. Late-night phone calls, people staring at me in crowds. The final straw was when someone broke into my house in the middle of the night. Luckily, I was out late at a friend's birthday party and only discovered the break-in when I came home in the morning. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't have gone to the birthday party. I would have stayed home, trying to keep a low profile. The last thing I felt like doing was partying. I was being harassed 24 hours a day, and I felt my mental health dropping into an abyss. But it was one of my best friend's birthdays, and I couldn't skip it. Sometimes the universe has a funny way of working things out, and on that day, I really believe it was fate that I was out of the house. I have no idea what would have happened if I had been there. I knew I had to act fast. I packed my bags, tidied up as best as I could, and left for good. I changed states, and the next few weeks were a struggle to change my identity as best as I could without leaving any trace. Now, my name is completely different. I no longer have the long hair I used to love. It's shaved. I live in another state. It's been 2 months since I took these drastic steps, and I haven't received any more threats. I'm sharing this story in the hope that others who have witnessed something like this know they are not alone. I can't reveal my name or the name of the cruise line, but I can tell you that if you've ever found yourself in a similar situation, you are not alone. About 10 years ago, my friends and I won a trip on a cruise. One of my best friends from college, who is famous on YouTube, was paid to document the entire trip. However, what none of his subscribers know is that more than half of the trip and what really happened was omitted from the video. As I mentioned, he's famous, so I can't reveal our real names. Even so, I think some people might be able to figure it out. I apologize if I have to omit some details, like the name of the cruise and the company that paid us to make the video. For the sake of this story, I'll call myself Ryan, my YouTuber friend Lucas, and the third person who traveled with us, Liam. Actually, Liam is the center of this story. As I said, this happened 10 years ago, in July 2014. It was a 16-day trip that started in Miami, Florida, passing through several places like Falmouth, Jamaica, Georgetown, Grand Cayman, and finally Cozumel, Mexico, where we would spend 2 days before returning to Miami. Needless to say, we were ecstatic. Today, 10 years later, Lucas is a successful YouTuber, but at that time, winning a trip like this was absolutely incredible and almost unimaginable. We wanted to do the best job possible. The first 5 days were incredible. We spent our days lounging by the pool and dining at various restaurants, and our nights hopping from bar to bar, socializing and sipping on delicious drinks. At 19, life felt amazing, carefree, and full of promise. Things only started to get a bit strange on the 6th day. We were at one of the main bars on the cruise when Liam mentioned he'd had a weird encounter in the bathroom with a strange man. He couldn't quite put his finger on what was off, but you know that feeling when someone is overly friendly, way beyond normal? Especially in a place like a bathroom. The man had asked him things like his name and where he was from. It might sound like a regular conversation, but the way Liam described it and the look on his face made it clear he was uncomfortable. The trip was going so well that we decided to brush it off and not think about it again. After all, the world is full of weirdos and creeps. We were not ready to let that guy ruin our cruise. Half an hour passed and we were having a few more cocktails when Lucas pointed out that a man was staring at us intently. He immediately asked Liam if it was the same guy from the bathroom. Liam shook his head. The bathroom man was tall with dark hair. This one was much shorter with dyed blonde hair. The stare was too intense, and, once again, strange. Normally, when you catch someone staring at you, they quickly look away out of embarrassment. Not this guy. He kept staring intensely, and we were the ones who had to look away. Something about that gave me chills. It was late, and we had been drinking quite a bit, so we decided to call it a night and headed back to our respective rooms. I was in the shower when I got a WhatsApp message. The three of us had a group chat, and Liam had sent a message asking us to come to his room quickly. Since I was in the shower, it took me a bit longer to get there, and by the time I arrived, Lucas was already there. I instantly noticed something wasn't right. Liam had a terrified look on his face. On the bed was a note cut into the shape of a red heart that said, "Loved meeting you." In any other context, it might have been sweet. But here, it was completely terrifying. Not only had someone entered his room invading his privacy, but we couldn't remember meeting anyone in particular that day. The thought that crossed my mind had obviously crossed theirs too. Could it have been the bathroom man? We quickly went to the cruise information desk and reported the incident. They were very attentive and not only mobilized the necessary resources swiftly, but also offered him a new room. After this, none of us wanted to be alone, so we decided we would all stay in my room. We spent the night awake, trying to figure out who it could be. We had met several people in the previous days, so assuming it was that specific man might not be entirely accurate. Even so, having someone enter the room was terrifying enough. The next day, we were called by the ship's police to provide further details about the incident. We learned that all the cruise ship's corridors were monitored by cameras. However, the person who left the note seemed aware of this and had meticulously navigated through blind spots between the cameras. In areas where recording was unavoidable, they appeared wearing a hoodie. From the surveillance footage, all we could discern was that the individual was a tall white man, and once again, our suspicions pointed towards the possibility of it being the bathroom man. The only description we had of him came from Liam, which was quite vague and did little to help identify him. Liam had been so uncomfortable during their interaction that he had avoided making direct eye contact with the man. The only distinctive feature Liam noted was a small tattoo near the man's left eye. Police assured us they would be looking for a man with those same features and gave us their direct contact. Despite all that had happened, we couldn't forget we were there to work, so we tried our best to enjoy and record good content for later publication. It was also a good opportunity to stay alert and see if we could spot the man again. On the 9th day of the trip, we arrived in Cozumel, Mexico. The cruise had offered us several itineraries to choose from, but after much debate, we settled on visiting the ancient ruins during the day and spending the evening at a popular local bar. Upon reaching the ruins, we were immediately struck by their beauty and historical significance. Walking among the ancient stones, we tried to immerse ourselves in imagining the lives of those who had lived there centuries ago. However, even in this serene setting, we couldn't shake the lingering tension. We found ourselves constantly glancing over our shoulders, wary of any sign of the man who had unsettled us on the cruise. We spent the afternoon exploring and capturing videos, attempting to maintain a sense of normalcy despite our visible discomfort. At one point, we noticed another group of tourists on a guided tour. Among them was a tall man with dark hair, dressed casually. Our hearts raced. Could it be the bathroom man? We made several discreet attempts to get closer to him, but he always seemed just out of reach. When we finally got close enough to see better, Liam realized it wasn't him. The relief was immediate, but it quickly turned to frustration. We were there to have fun, but that stupid note had completely dampened the group's spirit, especially Liam's. As night descended, we made our way to the bar we had planned to visit. It was vibrant and bustling, filled with both tourists and locals, featuring live music and a festive ambiance. It seemed like the perfect spot to unwind and momentarily forget everything that had happened. Halfway through a round of drinks, Liam excused himself to use the restroom. There seemed to be no reason for concern in such a crowded and lively place. None of those suspicious men were in sight, and the bar was packed with people. So, it felt natural for him to go alone at that moment. About 10 minutes later, we began to find it odd that Liam hadn't returned yet. We decided to check on him, but when we approached the bathroom, we saw the line snaking around two walls, one of which was out of our view. We assumed he was either already inside or stuck in the unseen part of the queue. Reluctantly, we returned to our spot. Another 10 minutes passed, and genuine worry started to set in. While it may not seem long in such a bustling place, given the events of our trip, we couldn't shake our unease. We actively began searching for him. We approached people in the line, explaining our situation and asking if anyone had seen him, but no one had. We hurried back to the bar, scanning every corner, but he wasn't there either. The bartenders dismissed us as drunk kids who had lost touch with reality, barely glancing at his picture. Frustrated, we went outside, hoping he had stepped out for air and forgotten to notify us. Deep down, though, we knew Liam wouldn't have done that, especially after what had happened. He was always the most cautious one among us, alert to potential dangers. But still, there was no sign of him anywhere. At that point, we should have called the police immediately. But 10 years ago, we were just kids, and our first instinct was to roam the streets, asking people if they had seen him. It wasn't until more than an hour of constant stress had passed that we finally decided to make the first call to the police. Looking back, I know it was a poorly thought-out decision, but in reality, you only truly understand how you'll react in such situations when you're in the midst of them. The rush of adrenaline and stress not only overtakes your body, but also clouds your judgment, making it hard to think clearly. We spent more than 2 hours with the police, giving a detailed account of everything that had happened. We carefully went over everything. considering even the smallest nuances that could be crucial in resolving the situation. We talked until there was nothing left to say, and by around 5:30 in the morning, we returned to the cruise ship. None of the other passengers knew what was going on. We had been told to keep quiet, and the official alert wouldn't be raised until morning, when we hoped to find him. We opened the door to the room, and there he was, lying on the bed, still fully dressed and fast asleep. He was in a deep slumber, and I vividly recall the overwhelming sense of relief, as if a massive weight had been lifted from my chest. Then we realized that although he was physically unharmed, he couldn't remember anything from the past 24 hours. After ensuring he was safe, we contacted the police again, and he was taken to the hospital for 2 days of tests. Physically, he was completely fine, except for traces of a high dosage of drugs in his system. None of us had used drugs, so it was evident that someone had spiked his drink. But who, and why? We spent several days reviewing passenger photos with the police, but none of the men we had seen were registered as passengers on that ship. Returning home, we held on to hope that one day we would uncover what happened. But to this day, we're still in the dark. We have no clue what might have happened during those hours. The cruise ship's security cameras had been disabled, hinting that it might have been someone working on board. However, the entire staff had been thoroughly scrutinized by the police. This experience still deeply affects me, but I can only imagine the impact it has had on Liam. Initially, we talked about it more openly, but constantly revisiting that trauma became too difficult for him, so it gradually became a taboo topic. What really scares us is being in the dark, not being able to understand what happened, how it happened, and why it was done. Has anything similar ever happened to you, or do you know someone who has experienced something like this? I feel that only once we have some answers will we truly be able to put this case behind us and move forward.